We should go ahead and get started.
All right, let's get started.
All right. Welcome, everybody. As I said, if you didn't hear earlier, we are recording the webinar today, and there will also be time to ask questions at the end. So we're delighted to welcome you to Navigating Uncertainty, Let Culture Be Your Guide. Uncertainty is absolutely a topic of the day. But there was also another day about 11 years ago when uncertainty was all that people could talk about. That day was January 15th, when US Airways Flight 1549 was in the climb out after taking off from New York's LaGuardia Airport. Less than 5 miles from the airport, the airplane hit a flock of geese and lost all engine power. Maybe you remember that story. Today it's referred to as the Miracle on the Hudson. That's because pilots Chelsea Sullenberger and Jeffrey Skiles, realizing that they would never reach an airport, glided the plane and landed it in the Hudson River off Midtown Manhattan. All 155 people aboard were rescued by nearby boats, and there were few serious injuries. What we later learned was that the captain and pilot in command, Captain Sully, was a former fighter pilot in the United States Air Force. So perhaps in that moment of crisis, he switched into autopilot. He was relying on years of training and his instinct and his own inner navigation system. This incident was later made into a movie called Sully, and a film critic, after watching the movie, made this comment. He said, "Most of all, this film is a great display of the power of the human spirit. Everything about this film is grounded in humanity." And that's what we're here to talk about today, how the power of the human spirit can prevail through crisis when leaders and teams and organizations know how to respond, what to do, how to behave, because their inner navigation systems have become internalized, operationalized. They've become like second nature, like that steady hand you can trust. This navigation system can kick in any challenge, but we need it especially to kick in times of uncertainty and crisis. So how do you build that kind of navigation system? Well, that's something that we've been working on for a while.
And we are excited to share that, and we're happy that you're here with us today. I wanted to talk a little bit about the ideas and the work behind the navigation system that we're going to talk about. But first, I'd like to introduce us and tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Theresa Agresta, and this is my partner who's been speaking to you, Cynthia Forstmann of CultureTalk. We know many of you and welcome you, and we're excited that you're here with us today. We are both students and teachers of culture, which is ultimately the ultimate navigation system for organizations. But before culture became our passion, we ran a business that helped organizations and leaders build meaningful brands. We did that by measuring culture in an organization and then letting the brand story emerge from that culture. It was a powerful and impactful process, and it had clients asking us to come back again and again. You see, helping them uncover that culture and the deeper layers that were true helped us to understand their story. And they wanted to use that story again and again to help with recruiting, management, onboarding and employee engagement, mergers and bringing cultures together, and the opportunity to lead and grow. So that was keeping us very busy. But at the same time, we realized that we were leaving a lot of opportunity on the table, because clients didn't necessarily understand that they could ask their branding agency to help with a leadership or an engagement challenge. And what we came to see and understand and grow is the program that we're going to share with you today, which is really grounded in storytelling. And it can be used more broadly to address many connected business challenges. We'll get to that in a few minutes, but we also want to ground this conversation in the context of what we're experiencing today and the moment that we're all living in.
We have begun to refer to that moment as BC, meaning before COVID. And didn't we think we had big problems before COVID? I can hardly remember the things we were worried about in 2019 or even as recently as January, but they included things like environmental crises and the Me Too movement, a lot of political tension around issues like immigration, a lot of political decisiveness in general. We were also talking about generations in the workforce and privacy rights. And believe it or not, Brexit happened in January and we had an impeachment trial. Doesn't that seem really like a long time ago? Because since we've hit 2020, it's been one crisis after the next, starting with a global pandemic that is literally changing, reshaping the life and work of everyone on the planet. We've also been experiencing worldwide protests in response to George Floyd's murder, police brutality, and longstanding racial bias. Everywhere, people and businesses are being asked to take a hard look in the mirror.
And from what we can see, no one has really escaped these crises. In fact, we know that it's impacting all of you on the phone here today. Today, there are more pressures on our teams and on our cultures than ever before. And in addition, formats like this, like Zoom, and people working remotely have brought employees' personal circumstances right into the foreground, things which companies used to be able to ignore. So now when workers show up on Zoom, their managers get to see inside their personal lives. We see each other's spouses, your children, your pets, and often your bad hair days, things that we used to be able to control more. So we want to start by asking you, how has 2020 impacted you? We have a quick 2-question poll, and we'd love it if everybody could take just a moment to answer. In 2020, what has been your biggest personal challenge? Now, these answers will be anonymous. And then second question, what has been your biggest business challenge? So if you could just take a moment to respond.
So Theresa, I'm just going to ask if people could chat to make sure they're seeing the poll. And
yeah.
Troy's answering in the poll. They can't see the poll, and I think it's because I have slides shared. So maybe just put into the chat box what are your biggest challenges. Tris, you want to frame the question again?
Sure. In 2020, what are your biggest personal what's your one biggest personal challenge? So is it employment? Has it been remote work? Or maybe you have a health or wellness challenge. You're concerned about COVID or the virus. Workplace safety. Maybe you've been working all along or you're being asked to return to work. Maybe it's family care. You're caring for your children at home or your elderly parents. Lots of different things that people are experiencing. And I'm sure all of us have one or more of these things going on. Yeah. So we see people saying isolation, staffing and staying virus-free, not being able to travel, college, kids at home, Zoom fatigue. Yes, definitely. That's something I think that we can all attest to. How many days have you spent just tied to your computer in a way that really feels unnatural in many ways?
Deciding to send my kids back to school, that's really hitting home.
Finding fun. Yes, super important. Time for fun. And business challenges, some people are starting to add those too. Get those business challenges in there. I see clients suffering, and that means that we're suffering, sort of this back and forth of watching other people, trying to lend a hand, not knowing how we can actually help other businesses or our clients. Limited traveling again, both business and personal impacts there. and grandparents in grief for losing things like our senior year. So lots of challenges that are happening, both on a business and a personal perspective. So one of the things that that really brings to the fore is this idea that individuals and organizations are inextricably intertwined. That's never been clearer than it is today. And the need for organizations to really address the fact that these two things are related and that the healthy development of one actually ensures the success of the other. So it's getting more complicated. And in our experience, there are 5 essential attributes that you need in order to navigate this.
Let me just pop the 5 up here really quickly. You need a defined net framework, a tool for measurement, scalability, sustainability, and shareability. And now it's incredibly important and useful to have this kind of a navigation system in place when we're just facing normal challenges. But as leaders and teams navigate the current unknowns and they try to land their own planes, it is absolutely essential to guiding clear, consistent decisions during crisis. Let's take a look at each of these 5 more carefully. We'll start with the first one. Here's a slide where we're talking about culture. Everybody's been talking about culture, but culture is really hard to talk about. And the reason it's hard is because we're a little bit like the fish in this fishbowl. We're swimming in our culture, and it's ubiquitous, it's intangible. It's hard to define and to talk about literally the water we're swimming in. Many organizations and leaders lack a system and a language to lead a meaningful conversation about culture that builds understanding. Or this rendition of culture conversation may be even worse, right? In this conversation, maybe two people think they're trying to talk about their culture, and we'll give them credit for that. And maybe they both think they're talking about flour, but in this case, they're not even, the meaning of flour is not even the same. So our conversations around culture, we can use the same words and still have very different meanings. Or I'm reminded as well of the parable of the blind men and the elephant. Briefly, there's an elephant that comes to town, and there are a number of blind men who can't see it, but they go to visit the elephant because they want to feel the elephant and determine what the elephant is all about. And so they each touch a different part of the elephant. One person on his trunk says it's a snake. Another one on its tail calls it something else. The ear feels like a fan. The side feels like a wall. And it's a lesson for us in organizational culture. What we can learn from this parable is that, each of our experiences may be true, but our subjective experiences are also limited in nature because we never have kind of the full picture, and we fail to take into account other truths. And when culture conversation goes the way of the blind men and the elephant, it's often a way that we get defensive, parties dig deeper into their trenches, and walls go up. So to facilitate a meaningful conversation that actually does the opposite, builds consensus around important issues, you need to establish a framework. A framework gives you a common language, one that the whole team can learn. The framework should apply both to individuals as well as to organizational cultures. When teams adopt a common framework, it becomes a foundation that you can build upon, a tool where you can evaluate existing programs and new ideas. Here's the framework that we use at CultureTalk, and it's not a framework that we made up. It's actually based in Carl Jung's work, and it's a universal code called archetypes. Even as you look at the names of these 12 archetypes, you can probably already begin to guess, which of these storylines might be active in your life or, the lives of other people that you live and work with. Heroes, saving the day, or magicians transforming things. What's powerful about archetypes is that they're timeless and they're relatable. And Jung said archetypes show up as personality in individuals, but in groups of people, they show up as a shared culture. So as we get to think about patterns of behavior and patterns of motivation, archetypes give us a shared language for talking about them. You can get everybody quickly on the same page about what type of culture exists in a group. And once you understand your type, you have a whole language to talk about your culture in a meaningful way. Let's just take a deeper look at two of the archetypes in this system. Hero, think about someone that is a hero, or think even if you have some hero attributes. When heroes show up in a positive way, they're definitely the kind of people that are here to save the day. They are known for setting goals, achieving things, persevering through difficult challenges. But heroes, because they're human stories, also have a darker side, something that Jung called the shadow. So if someone is high in hero, they might also be experienced from a shadow standpoint as someone that burns out easily or becomes overly aggressive. Or let's take the example of another archetype, explorer, and think about an explorer pattern in terms of how does it show up in an organization's culture. This pattern is all about independence and freedom. So when we see explorers show up in culture, we think about a culture that maybe is light on structure, one that is large on autonomy and flexibility and letting people carve their own path. Those can all be very positive experiences in an explorer culture. But as they show up in individuals, when archetype patterns show up in organizations, there's also a shadow. So that same explorer culture might be the kind of place where not enough focus is given to what we're here to do and how we're going to get it done. There may be a sense that we're not really accountable, and that we can get distracted easily by what's just over the horizon. So a framework is essential attribute number 1, but let's move, Theresa, to attribute number 2.
Okay, so another reason it's hard to talk about culture is because it's reflected in what we call the unwritten rules of engagement. And even when we attempt to write down what the rules are and what our expectations are, there's a gap between what we say and how things actually work around here. And I think that it's important, that we acknowledge that culture shows up in our shared values, and maybe we've captured those in our mission and vision and value statements, but they're also present in things that are maybe taboo to talk about. So how do we feel about politics? What are our expectations around home and family life or work-life balance? Is humor acceptable in the workplace? Are we a group that stands behind issues of justice? What are our thoughts and ideals around diversity and inclusion? And how about health and wellness? Our attitudes and beliefs about health and wellness today are probably not documented, but they're very much present in the underlying unwritten rules. And I think that culture is also kind of idiosyncratic. It's woven through the very things that are most difficult to force. For instance, interpersonal relationships. You can't control the relationships between your staff or the conversations that they might have, when they're bumping into one another these days in a Zoom room, but sometime it was over lunch or working late nights and, cramming for a deadline together. So maybe they were sharing complaints or sharing jokes, but the culture is definitely present in all of those things as well. So the question is, can culture be measured? Now, this comic is about 10 years old, but I doubt things have changed that much here. These charts show the general flow of communication at these companies. So they're all tech companies, and you might think that they have more in common than they have different. But it looks like Amazon is very hierarchical, Google, not so much. Facebook operates like a network, and maybe there's an all-out war going on at Microsoft. Apple's C-suite isn't afraid to subvert the chain of command, and at Oracle, you'd better run it through legal if you want to communicate anything. So in visualizing these shapes, you can start to intuit some really important cultural patterns that exist at these organizations and how different each of these cultures really are.
Mm. You know, Theresa, I love the backstory behind this graphic because actually there's a software product that allows companies to measure the flow of email. And so these designs were actually graphed based on the flow of email between leaders and members of the team in each of these organizations. So definitely communication shows a pattern, if you will.
Yeah. Yep, and communication is definitely something that is an important part of culture. So our essential attribute number 2 in a culture navigation system is measurement. Now, if you don't have a framework, of course, you're stuck believing that culture might be a list of perks or that it's nebulous and can't be measured. But when you do have a framework, you can measure against it. Without that measurement system, you don't have a way of understanding those underlying cultural drivers, leaving you to diagnose things by existing, symptoms and things that are really found at the surface. And they can become a trap where you can only have a really limited impact. And that might be some of the frustration that people experience with culture programs. You need a measurement system as well that eliminates finger pointing and blame. Fearing that they'll be labeled or judged could keep leaders from even starting the process. And some cultural tools, really do that. They label a culture as good or bad. And, you're right away going into it afraid to begin because you're going to be labeled and blamed. So when you choose a framework and a measuring system, you want it to be one that opens the door to a conversation and eliminates that fear of judgment. Organizational culture and individual personality exist on a continuum. So there is a continuum there, but it's really that continuum between strengths and shadows that Cynthia shared with us around the hero archetype, with the biggest strengths also sometimes leading to the biggest challenges. And because archetypes are human stories, they're rich and colorful, but they're also flawed and very relatable. And we can use them to position both our strengths and, as we talked about, those shadow traits and opportunities for growth. For instance, that goal-achieving hero who lives to conquer challenges can become an aggressive bully who overruns other people in its quest for the next big win. So you need a tool that eliminates finger pointing and blame. It allows us to see the whole rounded aspect of what's happening in a human being and in an organizational culture in a way that can reduce fear and allow a healthy sense of vulnerability and keep people safe at the same time. And when we look at the profiles that can come out of that measurement, you can see that everyone is unique and they allow us to show up uniquely as well as fully.
So now we've measured culture, and can't you just hear what this guy is saying? He's like, what? So what? Now what? We've done it. We've all been there. We've been in programs and organizations that feel like we just checked the culture box, or we've got a flavor of the month initiative going on. So that brings us, we don't want that. So that brings us to the third essential element, attribute of a culture navigation system, and that is scalability. The moment that you survey a team and ask their opinion on cultural issues, you must be prepared to share authentic results and an action plan designed to create change. If you don't, engagement and morale will actually be negatively affected. So identifying challenges or opportunities in a culture without a robust program for how you're going to use the outcomes to address change only serves to elevate concern and raise questions. But when you do a baseline culture audit or measure personality through archetypes, that actually can become a really powerful starting point. It should take us from point A to wherever we want to go, because culture can become a through line, if you will, like a map that points the way to how are we going to transform experiences, how are we going to transform people, how are we going to get aligned together. So here are a handful of ways that you can actually scale culture and team development initiatives using the framework and measurement system of archetypes. One way is, do you ever hear about why mergers and acquisitions fail? They say that up to 80% of the potential value of a merger and acquisition never happens because the post-merger integration goes afoul. And the primary reason it does is because we were unable to integrate the cultures. We were unable to identify where we were aligned and what the gaps were. So you could certainly use it here. You could also use a cultural assessment to design a culture change initiative, to say, here's where we are today, here's what's working, here's what's not working, here's the shadows that we need to minimize and mitigate, and we can use that information to shift our culture and design a culture that is more in line with where we want to go. Theresa mentioned earlier, we began using culture as a tool in a branding process that allowed us to take an inside out look at an organization and actually build a brand and an employment brand and a marketing program that reflected the culture, that attracted, good fit candidates and helped us communicate with all of our audiences. So that's another potential use. And once you have a brand, a big activity in recruiting and in retention in my mind was the hottest topic for many years, a little bit down right now with COVID, but how do you use your culture to actually attract the right people, to engage them, to onboard them in a really authentic and meaningful way so that they stay and they become long-term employees. And finally, actually not finally, we also use these tools, the measurement system, on a personal level with leaders and teams and actually across the entire organization to develop people, to help them see their own strengths and shadows, to coach performance, to help them articulate what their own purpose is, and to enhance collaboration between teams. And finally, in light of the topic we're having here today, how do you use culture to manage crisis or even manage kind of reputational crises, if you will? So again, looking at culture through strengths and shadows gives us very tangible ways of what behaviors need to change and where are we off course? How can we create a guide and a conversation and a consistent plan for moving through crisis? Even think about like our current scenario with remote work and people coming in and out of the office and offices opening and closing and kind of the toll that takes on our employees and our productivity. So we could be looking at who are we as through archetypes to say, what are the strengths that I can bring? What are the things that are really challenging to me because of my shadows? And how can I get better at sort of being ready to flip the switch? And how can we work more closely as a team? So a tremendous opportunity to scale here. And I'll close this by saying, here's an example of a company that actually did scale culture over a number of years. It's a trucking company called Nussbaum Transportation that has, doubled and tripled the size of their driving team. Driver turnover in transportation is a real pain point for the industry. So, year after year, they have become known as a best fleet to drive for as they have used culture as their navigating system. It's also allowed them to drive down turnover. So in an industry where that's a very painful aspect, Nussbaum continues to retain more of the drivers that it recruits. So let's keep going.
Okay, so let's take a look a little bit about what employees and employers are asking for in this environment. We see here some research from Gallup, which shows us that the demands have shifted. And we know this was true even before these crises, but with this tool in their pockets, employees are really looking for purpose and meaning. And they want to understand how to create relationship and use that relationship in the workplace, especially relationships with a manager or somebody that can help them to move through the ranks and experience their career from a more meaningful perspective. LinkedIn also took a look, and as they do every year, at some of the skills and the requests that are coming through from companies. And we're hearing again in 2020 that companies are looking for soft skills, that some of the things that used to be given when people came out of college and into the workforce, and even people who have been in the workforce for a while now, really need to be able to tap into these things for the type of economy and the type of exchanges that, that we have in today's world. So these soft skills and essentially the soft skills that employees are looking for all lead us to our next essential attribute, and that is sustainability. What we've learned from Gallup and LinkedIn and countless other polls is that checking the culture box isn't enough, and employees and leaders are really looking for something more. So to initiate meaningful and lasting change, culture programs need to be built on a sustainable foundation, one that's both memorable and actionable. And it's really important as well, as we just discovered, to uncover the personality of the leaders and the teams that are working in the culture and how their own beliefs and behaviors align with the organization. As we shared early on, one of the primary benefits of working with archetypes is the lasting impact and the ability to apply the outcomes across multiple culture initiatives, even as we as organizations evolve over time, and sometimes, as in now, we have to evolve quite quickly. Some of the most important ways that cultures need to evolve are around sustainability, including new ideas about diversity and inclusion, generations in the workplace, and integrating remote teams. We're relying on new ways of thinking and working together. And no canned training delivered on Zoom is going to move the needle. Archetypes give us the opportunity to go deeper, faster. And at the same time, they create this inherent psychological safety. And we need to move beyond lip service in some of these areas and onto conversations that are going to create lasting change. This here is a look at what we affectionately call the glass box. It comes out of the work of David Matten at Trend Watching. And it talks about the fact that we used to be able to say anything we wanted about our businesses because we could kind of paint on the outside of our box. Today, with today's emphasis on social media, authenticity, and transparency, we can no longer have that kind of control. And one of the main reasons is social media. The ability for our employees and other people in businesses to share anything instantaneously means that leaders no longer control the story. So it's vital that we get everybody telling the same story, using the same language, that they actually have this firsthand experience. It's more than talk, it's actually their lived experience, and they're the ones that are drawing this through line that we've been talking about. And that brings us to our final essential attribute.
Number 5, shareability. In our always on world, our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. And the amount of information that we need to consume is just growing and growing exponentially. And that means that a culture navigation system, the language and the tools that we adopt to lead our cultures, needs to have a sticky factor. It needs to be something that's easy to understand and memorable, like stories, and fun to share. It should also invite curiosity an open conversation. It should be Instagrammable. A system like this can become an effective and fun coaching tool. I can now share with you who I am, and I can understand who you are in a way that's visually inviting and gives us a real way to talk about our similarities and differences, a real way to explore how we can collaborate and how we might be wired for conflict. So those are our 5 essential attributes of a culture navigation system. So as we each go out into our businesses and into our lives, and we know that we've got to navigate through all of this really uncertain times and land our own planes, are you ready to take action? CultureTalk is actually a system that delivers on all 5 of the essential attributes that we've been talking about. At its foundation are 2 validated assessments that measure, one measures organizational culture and the second measures individual personality, but they both use that framework that we call archetypes. Plus, to scale engagements and impact, we offer modularized workshops and ready to implement training programs that can also be customized to fit specific challenges. Supporting materials run the gamut, from games to buttons to professionally designed handouts and sales materials. The CultureTalk system becomes a foundation to address multiple challenges, and it brings together both sides of the cultural equation, what's happening with the individuals and also what is happening with the organization as a whole. Over the past 2 years, we have certified an international community of practitioners. Many of them are here on this this webinar with us today. And they are trained to deliver culture engagements directly with their own clients, the leaders, teams, and organizations that they're working with. You can learn more about this talented community and the offerings that they each have on our website. We have a certified partner directory at culturetalk.com, and we encourage you to connect with partners if you're looking to bring this system into your business. And if you're ready to take action, and we believe that you are, because you're here with us today, and we've been talking to many of you for a while, we actually have a limited time offer to join our signature certification program. So let me tell you about it. What you get when you attend CultureTalk certification. Right now we're delivering only online via Zoom video, and we have 2-hour class sessions, 8 weekly classes. So over 8 weeks, you'll meet with us. There are tons of advanced program materials. We've just scratched the surface here today, but a lot of in-depth sessions and conversations with other practitioners. Those sessions are actually led by Theresa or I. You also, as a partner, have access to an in-depth library of materials that you can use to actually sell and run your own engagements. You get a 1-year membership in our community, which gives you access to things like wholesale pricing on the assessment tools and different events that we have throughout the year. You can do baseline culture assessments. You can build strategies for clients around, as we talked about, mergers, leadership transitions, brand engagements. You also have access to our individual personalities assessments, which you can use in recruiting programs, onboarding programs, executive coaching programs, I was going to say another one, engagement programs, team building programs. That's what that assessment tool is good for. And lots of other things. So let me tell you, our next class starts September 1st. And because of the current pandemic moment that we're all living in, we are offering the entire certification course at 50% off. So what used to retail for $28.50, you can get everything we just mentioned on this slide before right now for $14.25. And the place to see where our classes are and read more about the program is a URL down here at the bottom called getcertified.culturetalk.com. And because you joined us today, we've also added a bonus gift for only the next 48 hours. And if you sign up for our September class, which is starting in less than 2 weeks, on September 1st, the time of that class is going to start at 4 p.m. New York time. And if you sign up for that in the next 48 hours, we'll also include a starter pack of some of the facilitation tools you've seen, like the buttons, the card decks, quiz cards, mugs, and more, valued at $100. So a little incentive to join us as soon as you are able. And I was going to put in chat, Theresa. Let me see if it's still.
I did put in chat the URL, getcertified.culturetalk.com. I think I actually left a space in there, so don't put a space between the get and certified. It is one word.
Yep.
You can, let me type that in there again so that it can be a click through.
So again, in the next 48 hours, sign up for the September class, which is the next one up starting on September 1st. And you can, and I am getting some questions, Theresa, that we do offer a payment plan. So you can do either a single payment, or we do offer a 3-payment plan if that's helpful to you. And if you want to talk a little bit more one-on-one, I have actually just put a link into the chat panel as well, where you could schedule a call directly with me to chat about your situation, your business, your client. What are you looking to accomplish, and get your questions answered around the certification program. So that is what we've got to offer here today. And Theresa, I am going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay.
And I think we wanted to open up the floor to see if anybody had any questions that we could answer.
Okay, so if you have a question, do please go ahead and unmute yourself. If that, Cynthia, did you allow them to unmute?
Oh, hang on. I think I've got control of you all, which
Okay.
I don't mean to do. Unmute all. I've unmuted you all. So if you want to be on mute, go ahead and mute yourself. And anybody that wants to have, you know, here we've got, oh, I'm way past on the chat. So I see just the last thing. So somebody asked a question about the payment plan. And yes, we do offer a 3-payment plan. Any of our partners that are currently on the phone call that want to share any thoughts about the program, please feel free as well.
I had a couple of questions, Theresa and Cynthia. This is wonderful. There's 2 things, separate questions. One is, if I'm looking to use this at an organizational level, then how, and I think of, there's ways obviously you can determine what the culture currently looks like, but are you then using the archetypes to, for example, ask the leaders, what kind of culture would you like to have? And maybe they say, we would like to have the general culture to be these 4 archetypes. And then I'm working with the organization to help them. That was a little unclear. And then 2, how does this system maybe pair up with like the DISC? If I'm using a DISC, you know, the DISC assessment for leaders and teams, is it something I can use both, or is it kind of overkill?
Okay, so the first question, can you use the system to shift culture or reach a desired culture? And the answer to that is yes. But as we talked about in the slides, but the first thing we need to do is find out, where are you now? So it's hard to understand where do we want to go? And the first step to that would be to conduct a baseline culture audit to establish, here's where we are, point A. And then when we want to shift and change that, what would it look like? What would those actions, attributes, how would we know that we'd gotten there? and develop a plan around how to start shifting behaviors. And then you can also remeasure them as you're en route. So as you're moving toward that new desired reality, you have the opportunity to look back and understand, are we hitting the mark? That's the first question.
And I would just add to that, that we do have organizations that once they identify where they are looking at aspirationally, which archetypal patterns are they trying to develop, which is where the talents of our facilitators and consultants and coaches come in. How do you design the program or the intervention that is going to lead to that sustained change on an operational level?
Right. And then your second question, DISC and other personality assessments, or, there's lots of assessments. We know that there are lots of them out there. One of the things that makes CultureTalk different from some of the others is that what we talked about today, the ability to have the same framework and language to talk about both the organization and the individual. That being said, CultureTalk can also be used independent, so just the organizational assessment is a fantastic tool that can be used and applied to some of those organizational challenges. So if you're already using, some other systems, they are compatible. You can look at your individuals through a different lens. I think what you'll find after you get started with the CultureTalk system is that the ability to teach one language and one framework and have it flow seamlessly back and forth between them is a real strength. Did that make sense, Jean Marie? Did you? Okay, awesome. Thank you for your questions. Other questions?
Troy.
Okay, Troy.
You're on mute. I think you can unmute yourself.
I don't know if you can. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there he is. Yay.
My host was blocking me. I just finished the program, so I'm now a partner. So I could tell you, there's a lot of details in the program, which you probably already know from looking at what you would get. So I'll give you my insight on just what I felt with the program, and what I saw is that Cynthia and Theresa, they really treat you like partners. And so I ask a lot of questions. So I asked them a lot of questions, and they spent a lot of time answering my questions. So if you are not familiar with it, which I was somewhat familiar with archetypes, DISC and Myers-Briggs, and a lot of different profile that I did with myself and with other clients, and the archetypes, the depth that they go into them really helps you understand that it's a story that builds and keeps building, so you can learn the material, and the more you learn it, the better you can get at it. And I found that they really bring it together and in a better way than I've ever seen just by reading it. And so the class was really worth it to really understand it and in depth, but feeling that they were there and that afterwards they would be your partners. So you could, as you understood it and became more educated, they would be there at every level. Or if you had a client and you needed help going through that, how to apply it, they're really there for you. So I think that's something that was kind of hidden from, just looking at their website. And I was really impressed with that.
Thank you, Troy. And we take that feedback. We're not trying to hide. I noted in your comment, Troy, in the chat, you also talked about the incredible community of people that are involved with this system. There is a lot of brain power in the room. We have monthly partner calls and an annual partner event. And the work that this community is doing together is just taking us to new places. So it's very exciting to be part of a larger conversation with you. And Theresa, I see you responded to Chris. Maybe it's worth just mentioning who the program is ideal for.
Right. So Chris asked a question, is the program only for HR professionals? And actually, HR professionals are really appropriately aligned with this, but we also bring into the program brand development folks who are using it in much the same way that we initially developed it. We have strategists and management consultants, people working in organizational development, and those who are focused on mergers and acquisitions. We see people that are independent consultants that have their own businesses, and those that are part of an in-house training and development team. And we also have a good number of coaches who have been certifying on the system. And so there are, as we mentioned, many different ways to apply. And one thing that happens is that as people come into the program, they're able to broaden the services that they can offer, and they partner with one another. They're able to expand from maybe offering one, work in one of these areas. And just like we knew that we were leaving work on the table when we started with this foundational measure, they've been able to see the same thing and lead their clients through additional types of engagements. I'll give you one example. Amy Roman, who is a CFO and has a business that works with companies around strategy, finance, and culture, was literally able to add that third pillar that brings it all together and helps organizations to do much better financially because they understand those underlying cultural drivers. And so she's been able to build her business with this whole cadre of information and material. And so those are the kinds of stories that we just continue to hear over and over, as the breadth that allows our partners to really run a profitable business. I think that one thing that's really important to communicate is that we're consultants first. And we understand what it takes to get out there and to run a business, and how you need to close new business and bring people into your client base. And that the most important thing you need to do once you've brought them into your client base is to continue to grow with them. And so everything in the CultureTalk system is designed for you to succeed as a business owner, and for you to be able to build modules on top of one another and continue to deliver consulting engagements long after you've done the initial CultureTalk assessments with them. And I know some of our partners here have had experience with that as well.
Theresa, you may have said this. Did you talk about people in-house training departments?
Yeah, training departments, right? So training and development groups that are essentially acting as in-house consulting teams that are bringing the system and bringing it out into their client, which happens to be their internal company. So we've had lots of success with those types of trainers as well. And I think that as companies, as we mentioned, adopt a system and learn a language, it becomes more and more impactful. So the more people within a single organization that are brought into the language and the framework, the more that they can experience the positive impacts. Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, I'll just remind you that you can learn more and register for our September program at getcertified.culturetalk.com. And before we close down, we'll leave the chat open for just a minute here. If you wanted to reach out to us for additional questions or a private one-on-one call, Cynthia's her calendar link is in the chat panel. You can grab that and set up a call to learn more about the system and the program. We thank you for joining us today. We're really glad to have an opportunity to share these ideas with you about navigating crisis. And we hope that you have captured some important information about the 5 steps, the 5 attributes of a navigation system. We will be sharing the slides with you after the call.
Or the recording, actually.
Recording. Okay, so we're sharing the recording tomorrow. So look for an email from us. And remember that you have 48 hours to take advantage of the special offer of the starter kit for consultants if you register for our September program by this Friday. So thanks again, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you. Okay, Theresa, I'm going to end and then
Okay.
I'll call you. Okay.